Is
Are you following on the Instagram and stuff now?
of Antigua?
Yeah.
I think I am.
It's the best Instagram account on Instagram.
Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody to our Friday night date night. So tonight we are featuring Attimo Winery. They are a Piedmont based vineyard and winery that we have the pleasure of having in our, literally in our backyard in Lodo. They are on Larimer and 22nd and Larimer, sorry. So they're right downtown, amazing winery. And I'm gonna let Kyle, our winemaking expert, tell you more about that. But then I also have Jessica Roat with Grand Vin, Colorado, who is also going to be sharing some of her expertise when it comes to wine in general, not specific necessarily to Attimo. So I am going to bow out, drink wine with you guys, and then let the experts talk. So welcome, Jessica or Kyle.
No, I'll start. I'll introduce you. My name's Jess. Some of you have taken some classes with me. I have a master's degree in beer, wine, and spirits from Boston University. So if you have a question about geography, winemaking, grapes, regions, etc., I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about fermentation, distillation, etc. But I'm certainly not an expert on Attimo.
Jess, you went on Zoom.
We're learning.
We're learning in the same environment, but socially distanced. We're all at least 10 feet away. Okay.
So if you have questions specific to Attimo, Kyle is going to share the Attimo story with you. It's a story that's both local and far away, which is something that I think is pretty great. We have a lot of wineries here in Colorado, but we don't really get to go to them very often. And what we are able to grow here in Colorado is sort of limited, like high elevation, really rough soil, and there's just only so much you can do with Colorado fruit. So it's sort of a blessing that we get to have this opportunity to share something local with you, a local story, local people. You know, Kyle will tell it to you, but also we get to drink Italian wine, which is pretty sick. And I will let Kyle tell you the story of Attimo.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name's.
Hold on, let me make sure that I don't have you muted. No, you're good. Okay.
Okay,
Sorry.
we're good. Sorry, we're figuring this out. First of all, thanks to Jenn for having us here and Attimo and Jess at Grand Van. It's a pleasure to be here. Attimo is a very interesting project, as Jess was saying. Many of you may know, but for those of you who don't, the founder of Attimo is John Schlegel. He's also the founder of a very well-known breakfast joint that we all know called Snooze. So John's, I guess, goal by 30 was to open his own restaurant, and that happened to be Snooze. And his goal by 40 was to live abroad with his family. So John built Snooze to the empire that it is now until he was 40, and then back in 2000, I believe it was 13, he, packed his wife and his son up and said, we're moving to Europe. And John was really interested in wine, and they landed in Monforte di Alba, which is the southern part of Piedmont. And that's kind of where the journey began. John and his family purchased a agriturismo, like a small bed and breakfast, and it happened to be right next to this Barolo vineyard. And one thing led to another. and John started chasing his wine dream. And, fast forward, we opened last January in Denver on 22nd and Larimer as our tasting room. But so the way this kind of came about in a shorter version is, John is standing in a grocery store line. He doesn't speak a lick of Italian. And he's in Monforte di Alba where nobody speaks any English. And the woman in front of him speaks English to her child. And John's captivated. He's like, wait, you speak English? And she turns around and she's like, you speak English? Like, wait a minute. Like, what are you doing here? And he's like, we moved here. And she asked what he was doing in Italy. And he said he wanted to create his own wine label. And it was his dream to live in Europe. And she said, well, you should meet my husband. He's the head winemaker for Chiretto, which is a super high-end, delicious Barolo Barbaresco producer in Piedmont. And he happened to be Australian, so he spoke English. It was a little slightly different English, but you get the picture. And so they became really good friends and hit it off. And so he became the first consultant winemaker for Attimo, the brand. And Fletcher is the one that has all the, the relationships and the connections in Piemonte to find the best fruit. And that's kind of how the journey began. So basically how the Attimo story works is, so we basically partner with growers in Piemonte and we make the wine in Italy. And then we basically, once the wine is fermented and finished wine, we ship it across the ocean in a refrigerated tank or boat and, the refrigerated truck to Denver, where on site we barrel age it and we bottle it and then we, sell it to you guys. So it's a really interesting project in the sense of nobody else is really doing that. John is a very revolutionary guy and he knew he wanted to bring his love for Piedmont back to Denver and share it with all of us. And that's kind of how Attimo got started. I can give you a quick background on me. The last 7 years, I've kind of been on my winemaking journey. I started in hospitality and restaurants and everything. And then I became a sommelier, and then I launched an urban winery. And then I really wanted to kind of get my hands in the soil. And so about 6 years ago, I took my first job and happened to be in Western Colorado. As Jess was saying, we do grow grapes here, but it's kind of wild. I mean, at almost 6,000 feet elevation, it's a very humbling experience. But that led me, I got my hands, I got on a tractor overnight and I'm working on irrigation lines. And it was just a wild change of pace from a downtown Denver busy restaurant world. And then that led me to, I went out to Oregon, Willamette Valley. I worked with Dolcetto Winery and really started to fall in love with the production of wine. And so was out there for a year and a half and then came back to the Western Slope and worked with Jackrabbit Hill, which is a biodynamic, organic producer. And that was a really great experience as well. And then my fiance got a job teaching at Regis. So we were heading back to Denver and, I'm like, the winemaking options are pretty limited when you're going back to a city. So, I met John about, oh my gosh, probably 8 years ago, right before he was getting ready to go on his Italian journey. And it always stuck out in my head. And, we knew a lot of the same people. And sure enough, when we moved back to Denver, I Googled John Schlegel wine, Denver, and boom, it was Attimo opening in 2 weeks or whatever it was. And so I just walked in the door one day and it was, we just hit it off just like we did 8 years ago. And my goal is obviously one of my goals is to make wine in Italy. And Attimo has been that bridge. And, here's you guys ready for my 2020 my sob story of it is I had a 3-month internship lined up in Italy with Fletcher, our consultant winemaker. So I was going to be staying in Monforte di Alba, making wine with Chiretto, making the Attimo wines. And then obviously COVID closed that door. I couldn't get out of the country. So fingers crossed, everything's still a go for 2021, but the reality with grape harvest is, it only happens once a year. So you got to wait a calendar year to get that experience. But enough about me. I help with, the production side of Attimo, as well as doing stuff like this, and super stoked to be here. We have 3 amazing wines that we can walk through. We have a Dolcetto di Dogliani, a Barbera di Alba, and a Barolo, 3 wines of which are awesome representations of Northern Italy. And with that said, we can start off with the Dolcetto, and Jess, if you want to lead the tasting portion of that. And then if anybody has any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer. But it's time to start drinking.
Awesome. So the first wine, Dolcetto, is definitely the wine that you would want to drink the youngest. And a question came up about aerating or opening wine early. It's a pretty difficult question to answer without imparting magic knowledge on you overnight. But I will say this: wines that age need to be opened early. Wines that are meant to be enjoyed now, maybe less so. So without knowing everything in the world to know about wine, not that anyone ever could, Dolcetto is a grape that tends to be enjoyed young. It's fruit forward, typically. It's darker in color than the Barbera and the Nebbiolo that you're going to have. And that has a lot to do with the skins on Dolcetto. All 3 of the wines that we're going to taste tonight are acid-driven wines. And what I mean when I say that is that when you're thinking about tasting wine, I really want you to try to separate your brain between 2 really distinct ideas. One idea is taste. And taste is not complicated. Like we learn it when we're kids. Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. Those are the 5. And in wine, typically we're only going to talk about sour and sweet. Tonight we're going to talk about bitter too, just because we're in Italy and Italians love bitter. Olives, radicchio. Bitter is a very Italian, amaro, things like that. And they're not scared to admit that their wine tends to have like a little bit of bitterness, which is a good thing. But when we talk about sour and sweet on this left side of our brain, all the wine that we're going to drink tonight falls out of the sweet category. Okay, everything is bone dry. And it's really, really hard to teach this to people who use the right side of their brain to talk about taste. Okay, so just those 5 things I want you to think about for the left side. The other side is all emotional. And when I say that, I mean, when we use language to describe something in terms of our taste, we're using a totally different function. We're using all of the history of our past experiences, where we came from, what we like to eat, etc. So if we say something tastes like strawberries, problematically, you might hate strawberries. You might have grown up in Colorado where strawberries are like really tart, disgusting little green balls of trash. Or maybe your boyfriend or your lover grew up in California where strawberries are always really sweet and unctuous and delicious and perfect. So if you use the word strawberry, or in the case of these 3 wines tonight, I think the correct fruit term would be cherry. They're very cherry-oriented wines. There's lots of different kinds of cherry, right? Like shitty cherry candy, amazing Washington cherries, black cherries, tart cherries, sweet cherries. There's a lot of words that can come out of the word cherry, okay? But when you just talk about acid and sugar, now we're talking technical, we're talking argumentative. Like I could test this wine and tell you how sweet it is or how sour it is. And it is what it is. It's a testable situation. So all 3 of these wines, I would say, are acid driven. And the Dolcetto is the least of which is acid driven. So it'd be the one we want to drink first. It's sort of like a palate prepper. And I say all of this while also stating that Dolcetto does not get the fucking respect it deserves. Excuse my language. Dolcetto is an excellent grape. It just happens to also be grown in a place where the king of all grapes, Nebbiolo, is grown. So it takes a back seat. Like if Dolcetto was being grown in Colorado, it might be king grape. But alongside Barbera and Nebbiolo, In terms of like batting average, Nebbiolo is the king of all Italian varietals. Sangiovese might fight it to the death a little bit. In Piedmont, I'm going to share my screen with you. Don't get scared. It's going to happen. You did it right. Woo, check it out. Can y'all see that? Yeah, okay, so here's Italy. It's beautiful. We all wish we could be there right now or ever this year. But the area we're talking about is right here. Dark, dark orange. Northeastern Italy. Over here is Switzerland. Okay, Germany's up here. So arguably, you should imagine that this is all mountains. Well, you don't have to imagine. This is all mountains, okay? Piemonte would be how you say this in Italian. Piedmont is how we say it here because we're Americans. And that literally means the foot of the mountain. So all of the grapes being grown for the wines we're tasting tonight are grown at the foothills of these giant mountains. And I mean, we know a lot about that because we're Coloradans. We actually live in a very similar place. This is a zoom in of Piedmont. So this orange area is here. And boop, we're in the blue area, okay? Dogliani is the most important place that Dolcetto is grown in Piemonte. And that's pretty important that it has its own place now, because if growers can make money, that's what they're gonna do. If the price of Nebbiolo is like something like 12 times that of Dolcetto and like 8 times that of Barbera. So it's the same in California where Cab is king. They're gonna grow Cab if they can, which is why you see so much less Merlot or Cab Franc or Syrah or Sangiovese being grown in California. You grow what you make money growing. And Italy has a lot of wine law. But Dogliani, over here, where is it? Right here. Boop, boop. Can you tell us a little bit about the production method of this particular Dolcetto? Oops, don't look at that. Here we are. Oop, Kyle.
Hello.
Hello.
So what's super special about it?
She was saying about a lot of times or more often than not, you'll see Dolcetto d'Alba in a wine shop. But rarely you'll see the Dolcetto Dogliani. And as she was mentioning, Dogliani is like the most important region for Dolcetto because it's the one area where they designate the best slopes, the best growing slopes for the Dolcetto grape, which is awesome. It's a big kind of, I love Nebbiolo, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of like a middle finger to like the Nebbiolo growers. Like Dolcetto can be just as good. We'll show you. So the Dogliani, 2000, we got the 18 going here. So basically, as she was saying, there it is. The Dolcetto is, short maceration time. I don't know all the details because I didn't actually make this wine, but it's, thin skinned grape. It's not going to age as long as the Nebbiolo. It doesn't have the tannic structure, but it was aged in neutral oak. We aged it in a year before it was released. And it's a delicious wine. It's medium bodied. You'll notice that the Dogliani Dolcettos versus the Albas are a little more. There's more structure. There's more complexity going on with the wine. And ironically, this is funny because Dolcetto translates to little sweet one, which is kind of very confusing because it's usually never sweet. It's always like fermented dry. But with Jessica on this, like I'm definitely team Dolcetto because it's delicious. And it's one of the most widely planted varietals in Northern Italy. It's like what they drink at breakfast. I'll drink it at breakfast. I'll put it in my cereal. It's delicious, but
I like breakfast wine.
yeah, Jen likes breakfast wine. You didn't hear her, she's muted, but I heard it. Jess, I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, Dolcetto being called little sweet one. How confusing. It takes a lot less effort to make a wine that doesn't need to age. Okay, so I want to talk briefly about how expensive it is to make wine and what a pain it is. let's say that you decided you wanted to become a winemaker and you bought a vineyard. Okay, Kyle, someday, but you bought a vineyard and you planted from scratch, and you had to pay for the land, you pay for the cuttings, you pay someone to plant them for you, most likely, or till for you. It's going to be approximately 7 years before any decent fruit comes off of those grapes. It's like if you planted an apple tree in your backyard right now in Berkeley, you'd have to wait some time before actual apples are being grown off of that tree. It's just the Mother Nature, she works slowly. You would want, if you were in Piemonte, you would want a grape that's ready soon, that you then didn't need to spend a lot of time aging. Nebbiolo is not that grape. We're going to get to the Barolo, and hopefully you did open it a little bit earlier, or while I'm jabbering on, you have time to let it be open. So open it now if you haven't, please. Barbera, there's a lot of arguments about whether or not you should age Barbera in oak. So in the Italian government, there is not a law about Barbera d'Alba being aged in oak, which surprises me greatly, actually, considering how serious Italian wine law has become. For Barolo and Barbaresco, which are both made from the grape Nebbiolo, there's significant aging requirement. None on Barbera, none on Dolcetto. So if you're a young person trying to make wine, you need these grapes, because after 7 years of waiting for your grapes to grow, then you have a year of harvest, crush. In that time, probably you've spent some money to make a label. You've come up with this fancy name, Attimo, which means moment. You've moved your whole family to Italy, and you need some grapes that are going to be ready to go. So when you taste this Dolcetto, Kyle mentioned it's been aged in neutral oak. This wine is, 2018 wasn't that long ago. It seems like a long time ago now because we've been at home for 2 freaking years, it feels like. But it's pretty young. It's young. It's fresh. It's bright. It's light. Italians, like he said, drink this for breakfast. But really, it's like if you walk down to the market and they fill your bottle out of a big cask, it's Dolcetto. It's sort of like a go-to. You can do that at Attimo, by the way. You could go to Park and 22nd, and they will. I just want to walk downstairs and fill my yeah, basically it's just wine on tap. But this is a little more serious than that. So, do all of you have all 3 wines available to you at once, or are we just going one at a time? Raise your hand if you're going one at a time. Okay, most of you. Okay, we'll focus. I'm not great at focusing. Focus. Raise your hand if you think this wine is sweet. Oh, what good kids. Oh, so good. This wine is bone dry, but it does have that element of fruitiness. And one huge problem that you'll overcome in your first little bits of learning about wine is this idea that something fruity is something sweet. So you're not wrong. It's really confusing. And it's really, really hard to explain. But put this wine in your mouth, give it like a little swirl around. And then if you feel, and then swallow it, ideally. If you feel some spit start to form, like, the juices are really flowing, that's created by acid. And acid and sugar are not non-existent within each other's boundaries. So when grapes are grown, they start as little tiny balls of acid. You're never going to get away from there being some acidic element to grapes. But as they ripen, they become sugar. Okay. Tartaric acid changes over time to sugar. And the longer grapes hang on the vine, the less acid there is and the more sugar there is. I wish that it were simple, that all grapes had the same journey on that path, but all grapes are not created equal. Some grapes are so acidic that even if you let them hang all the way through October, November, even, they would still be really tart. Some grapes lack acid and are really flabby and end up getting blended into really acidic varietals. So if you've ever had Bordeaux Blanc, it's Sauvignon Blanc, which is super, super aggressively acidic. Like you've never had a sweet Sauvignon Blanc. None of you, whether you say you have or not, you have not, I promise. Is blended with Semillon, because Semillon is just like a flabby fat thing. It kind of rounds out and softens the Sauvignon Blanc. Okay. All three of the wines we're tasting tonight, you could let them hang all day and all the way through until they're little raisins, and they're never going to be, they're never going to be sweet. They're dry wines. But of the three, this Dolcetto has the most sort of like groovy, sexy, lush, fruity thing going on. Who does everyone like this wine? You won't hurt Kyle's feelings, I promise. Kyle likes it. Dan likes it. If you don't like it, you might like the other two wines better. You might like all three. But I find that usually when people taste all three of these wines in a row, their preference is either for one or the other. And I will try really hard, if this is like the beginning of you being a nerdy wine taster, to instill in you that cost should have nothing to do with your preference. You would rather be a cheap date. I promise. Please do not fall in love with expensive wine if you don't have to. If it happens to you, I'm sorry. The more expensive the wine you drink, sometimes it ruins stuff. So the first question that came up was, why would you open Barolo 2 hours before drinking? That's not the question. But then how do you know which wines to do that for? And man, it's really complicated to answer this question. The first little bit I will say, and we'll get to it when we taste the Barolo, is that Barolo is an extremely tannic wine. It's like getting punched in the face by a really angry woman. It's big, it's bad, it's scary. And sometimes it just takes a little time. Dolcetto, you open it up, she's ready to go. There's no fight. Barbera is the same way. But because of how tannic and how heavily oaked Barolo is, a little bit of air never hurt it. You can speed that process up immensely by decanting or by popping the cork, putting the cork back in and giving the bottle a good shake. That shoves oxygen into the wine itself. It sort of, it's called aerating it, but it also just sort of shocks it out of its stagnation. If you imagine like how long the wine in this has been in this bottle, okay, we're dealing with 2015 vintage. That was then aged a minimum of 2 years to be called Barolo. No way around it. Can't put the word on the label unless it is. And then it rested. You know, I don't actually know, Kyle, probably 3 years.
Yeah, so the
30 months in a neutral oak, and then an entire year in bottle before we released it. And that's kind of our standard. A lot of Barolos, it's, people usually go for the 3-year mark where it's 2 years in oak and then 1 year in a barrel. If you want to add it to be a Reserva, or you add another 2 years of aging. But it's really, like she was saying, like it's pretty wild to sit on a product that long before you can enjoy it, but it makes it that much more special. She was saying the Italian wine laws are super strict, and to be a Barolo, you have to age it for a certain amount of time in an oak, certain amount of time in a bottle. So that's, another reason why it's the king of Piedmont, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. The wine would be undrinkable were it to not age. And I will try to explain that in a super easy way, which is just the varietal itself is Nebbiolo. And Nebbiolo is a super thin skinned grape, but within those skins is an enormous amount of tannic structure. So when I say tannin, the same way I asked you to taste this Dolcetto and then feel out if you got a bunch of spit in your mouth, that's acid. Tannin is more of a mouth feel sort of situation. So as much as it's disgusting to think about putting fabric in your mouth. If you put, it could be sexy. If you put silk in your mouth, it could, just saying. If you put silk in your mouth, it's really soft and smooth and slick, okay? If you put wool in your mouth, it's less comforting, right? It's the same difference between skim milk or heavy whipping cream. It's gonna give you a different feel and a different mouth coat. Tannic structure is like if you overbrewed iced tea and it makes you kind of make that type of sound or face. It's like thickness on your palate. Barolo is an extremely tannic wine. It's Nebbiolo itself. The grape is arguably the most tannic grape available in all winemaking that we can taste. Zino Mavro, a grape from Greece, is similar in its tannic structure. Cabernet is actually extremely tannic. And there's a few ways to take that tannic structure and mute it. The most popular way is oak aging, which is why the Italians decided to, slap a law in place to make sure people wait. You can buy Nebbiolo grown in the same place that this Barolo is made. That's not Barolo because it wasn't aged. Okay, so if you ever see a label, in fact, Attimo makes one, Langhe, Langhe Nebbiolo. These are less aged, non-demarcated grapes from a very similar region. I actually will show you. I'm learning how to do this. Okay, here I am, bam. So like I said, we're over here. How do I do this? Oh, here we go. Here, that's not the map I want. This is the map I want. Bam. Bam. Okay, so this is Piedmont. There's probably over 100 grapes grown in this region. I would say if you walked into Molly's or another large retail store, you might find 6 or 7 of them. If you walked into an independent, smaller store, you'd probably find 3 or 4. You'll definitely find a Barolo. You'll most likely find a Barbaresco. Most people would equate them as Barolo being the king of Piemonte and Barbaresco being the queen. They are both made from Nebbiolo. Barbaresco tends to be a little softer and gentler, and that's based on calcareous marl soil structure and longer aging times. Barolo tends to be a little more muscular. But if you see Nebbiolo d'Alba, we're in the same area. Fresia is a grape you'll get to know. Brachetto is a grape you'll get to know. But you'll see Gavi is a white grape. You'll see Dolcetto, Barbera, and a version of Nebbiolo really consistently. You're good. What other questions do we have? Oh, what is umami? Jill. Okay. Hi, Jill. Oh, you did? Read further. Oh, savory, yes. I see it. Okay, Jen addressed this, but acid and sugar, like I said, are not mutually exclusive. So when a grape is going from, I'm still sharing this, maybe no, hopefully not. No. Okay, it goes from high acid to really, really, really ripe. So if you ever taste like a wine from Lodi, wine from Napa, wine from Paso Robles, the reason they're so high in alcohol is because when sugar increases and then you make that into wine, you ferment that, the more sugar that you have in original grape must, the higher the alcohol is going to be. So on this Dolcetto, I'm going to guess 13% alcohol, 12.5% alcohol. Yeah, 12.5. If this were being grown in Paso Robles, I bet that number would be closer to 15. Okay, so alcohol and sugar have a connection. Acid and sugar do not. If you make lemonade and you squeeze a bunch of lemons, you're just going to have acid. That's it. There's almost no sugar in lemon juice. As you make the lemonade, you add a bunch of sugar. That's like the ripening of grapes. The acid level doesn't go down. It stays. You still have the same amount of acid as you did when the grapes were picked. Okay. They're just also sugar now. It's a conversion basically. And the end goal of all winemakers is to find some balance between those two things. If you drink a Riesling that's sweet, I guarantee if you take a little time to taste that wine and think about the acid level that's there, the acid is so high that the winemaker or law dictates that some sugar needs to be there to make the wine drinkable. Umami as the fifth taste. So sweet, sour, bitter, salty, hopefully not salty in your wine unless we're like in a really weird coastal region in Spain, or sherry. Umami is like mushrooms, broth, savory. And I'll be honest, yes, wines have this. They also have bitterness, but people in a position of power to talk about tasting wine have not ever really decided to talk about umami in wine yet. It's coming soon. We don't talk about bitterness in wine either, because when we think of the word bitter, we think about a bunch of negative stuff. And people who make wine and sell wine don't want to talk negatively about the product that they make. Hopefully you already drank your Dolcetto and you should be drinking Barbera. Yeah. Okay. Major difference here, right? Hopefully everyone has experienced a big shift from the Dolcetto to the Barbera. I don't actually know, so maybe I'm full of it, but I would say there's a greater oak presence on this wine. Am I right, Kyle?
%, neutral. It's a super fun. I love Barbera. It's such a fun food wine. Barbera is it usually has that dark, beautiful purple color, but it has high acid, which makes it pair so well with food. And it's also tannic structure wise, it's not like a super full bodied, dry your mouth out wine. You can have it without food and it's still delicious. Ours comes from Alba, the town of Alba. The other Barbera you'll see around is Barbera d'Asti, which is usually a little softer and a little more feminine. She's bringing up the map. Look at that. Okay, I'm gonna keep talking. The map threw me off. I got lost in it, but it's bright acidity, medium bodied wine. It's super delicious. You get a lot of floral on the nose, raspberry. And ours, I get it like a little mint, but this is all subjective, obviously. But super well balanced wine, bright acidity. She's going around the region of Alba there. But Barbera is another wine too that, you can drink them pretty young. They're not a huge, tannic wine that needs to age to soften for for it to not, totally take all the enamel off your teeth. But do you have anything to add to that, Jess, with Barbera?
Yeah. So in the 1960s, Italy was going through some enormous changes. Actually, Italy is not a very old country. If you know a little bit about Italian history, it was basically free reign. All three of these wines, by the way, were being grown in the 1800s. Grapes, these wines. All three of these grapes were being grown. They're indigenous to this part of Italy. So it's not like anybody brought them here. They're not French varietals by another name. They are Italian through and through. And the argument in the late 60s in Italy was, do we use French oak here? Or do we hate the French so much that we are willing to forego aging our wines that way as a big, what to the French? And Spaniards went through that too. If you try to think about wine history in terms of world wars, you'll learn wars between countries. You'll learn a lot about why they make their wine the way they do. It's hard to imagine that as a concept until you start to really think about wine, until you learn a little bit more about wine law. But for example, some of you have tasted with Rioja with me. Rioja is traditionally post-phylloxera aged in American oak. And that's because over their dead bodies were they going to be buying French oak, and the French weren't going to sell their oak to Spaniards. Same situation in Italy. French oak was a huge no-no. And if you know anything about Berlusconi, you know he was involved with the French a tiny bit. And so you'll see a change about 50 years ago where French oak started being introduced into Italy. So for the first time ever, you saw wines being aged in barriques. When we say barrique, I mean a really, really small barrel. If I ever say Hungarian or Slavonian oak, I'm talking about a barrel, a huge barrel you could have a little apartment in New York. Most of you have heard me discuss this a tiny bit, but I would say in your learning, think about oak like a breathable entity. So Slavonian oak or Hungarian oak breathes very little. It means it's less porous. Okay, so you put wine in it and it barely goes in and out of the pores. It doesn't impart that much flavor. Also, because the size of these barrels are huge, less of the wine touches the edges of these barrels, therefore less flavor. Okay, so if you're using the oak to just round out the edges a tiny bit on a wine, or just, this is pre-stainless steel, right? We didn't have stainless steel tanks. We couldn't just plastic anything. These were the best barrels just to keep wine, just for it to stay the same and just age and not get ruined. Okay, giant. French oak, a little bit more porous and made really in small sizes. So barriques are pretty small. I can lift one if it's empty.
55 gallons.
Yeah, 55 gallons, 228 liters. So more of the wine touches the barrel and it breathes a little more, imparting more flavor. American oak, even more porous. So if this wine was aged in Slavonian or Hungarian oak for 6 months, you would almost taste no oak on it. If we change that statistic to barrique, you would taste a lot more oak on it. If we change that statistic to American oak, you'd be in vanilla coconut town, okay? And also, oak really softens a wine. It takes all that acid we talked about and it makes it really like ooey gooey, fresh, soft. So regardless of the amount of fruit character, the Barbera has a lot less fruitiness, in part because it's seen some time, some aging. They're the same vintage, the two wines, but to me, the Barbera is just a little sexier. The Dolcetto is more of a pizza wine to me. Does Italy allow producers to blend a certain amount of other grapes into their wines and still label them as a single varietal? Yes. Yes, however, 99%, no, 96% of Italian wine is not necessarily labeled just to its varietal. 2 of the 3 wines we're tasting tonight are. Both of them have a little D, a little of. So this is Dolcetto of Dogliani, which is a little village. This is Barbera of Alba. Alba is the village. And both of those wines, because they're from a village, have a rule attached to them. In this case, they're both required to be 100% of the varietal that they are. And they are 100% Dolcetto, 100% Barbera. If you just bought a Barbera that said Principe di Pavia or some other widely unknown region in Lombardia, it could have up to 10% of another varietal in it. Doesn't usually. Blending is sort of not the thing in Piemonte wines in particular. But in the rest of Italy, Blending is the whole thing. If you've ever had an Amarone or a Valpolicella, these wines are blends naturally. The same way that Côte d'Aron is a blend, it is. So Barolo is the region. It is not the grape, but it is legally required to be 100% Nebbiolo. So in the case of all three of these wines, they're all 100%. Hopefully that explains that question.
Are there any domestic examples that would be equivalent to that or no? 'Cause I know
Oh my
in
gosh, no.
California I only know California. So 85%,
California.
Only 85% have to, but are there any regions specifically domestically that?
Okay. The United States is so young in the winemaking world. It's so young, you guys. It seems we're from here, so we have like a connection to it. But we really didn't get national recognition or worldwide recognition for being winemakers until 50 years ago. And even then, it was just for Cabernet and Chardonnay. And like all other laws in the United States, they're meant to be broken. And we aren't transparent about our wine. Okay, if you went, we talked about the Prisoner tonight, so I'm going to use it as an example. If you went and bought a bottle of Prisoner, it would say the words Red Blend and Napa Valley on the label. What that means is that the wine can be made from any varietal under the sun, any year, from anywhere in Napa. It could be like, it could be 50% white grapes and you would not even know. It can also be 15% from grapes outside of Napa. Okay, it's the total exact opposite of what is in your glass now, which is hopefully Barolo, which has like really serious laws. Like it has to come from this really small region. Okay, I'm going to share it with you one more time, just so that you can see what we're talking about. By the way, this whole area on my screen now is not that much larger than Denver Metro. Would you agree with me, Kyle?
No, I mean, yes, I 100% agree.
Okay. I've never been there and Kyle has, so important. But that means Barbera being grown in Alba is being grown in Wheat Ridge. Okay. And Barolo itself is actually quite small. Here is this. Sorry, I'm on my own now. Here's Barolo. This is the whole map of Barolo. And this is like the size of Wheat Ridge, Arvada, and a tiny bit of Lakewood kind of combined. All of the wines that you're tasting tonight are from Monforte d'Alba, which is a really small growing region. So if you buy a bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet, it's the same size of a growing region as all of Barolo. If you bought a wine from Stagecoach Vineyard or from Rutherford, it would be from an area the size of Monforte d'Alba. Hopefully that makes some amount of sense and I haven't just like totally mind fucked you because it's really complicated. Let's see what else. What do you guys want to know? Well, let's talk about Barolo. Let's let Kyle talk. You've heard enough from me. I'm certain of it.
Okay, we've already touched a little bit on the Barolo, but this is kind of Northern Italy's claim to fame for sure. They say the second, tier is Barbaresco, which is the same varietal. Barolo is the Nebbiolo grape, as Jessica mentioned. It's, they call it the king of Piedmont. It's, it's a wine that can age forever. Like Jess was saying, there's a reason why they age it as long as they do before it's released, because it's such a tannic wine that it's pretty much undrinkable when it's first fermented. Our Barolo, this is a 2015, I think is what we're pouring right now. Yep. I mean, it's just crazy. I know I mentioned this earlier, but like this wine saw 30 months in oak and then an entire year in bottle before it was released. So it's a super special wine, and Nebbiolo in general has this beautiful like brick red color to it. Even before you smell it or taste it, you can almost, once you've had as much as I have, you can be like, oh, that's Nebbiolo before you even taste it. But this is definitely their claim to fame. And Fletcher, the consultant winemaker, I'm super excited to work with him. He's made some amazing wines for Toretto, and he also has his own private label called Fletcher Wines, which the only way to get that in the United States is at Attimo. Go figure. But we shipped in a pallet of his personal label wines that are you can actually purchase them here in Denver. They're unbelievable, but it's just like such a cool experience to taste his wines next to ours. Like the same hands, different same hands, same grape, but different vineyards, and it's a super special partnership we have with him. But Barolo is definitely one of those. The 2015 that we're drinking now it's drinking well. I think it's still a little tight. It still has that structure that you almost need like some fatty food to kind of balance it out. But I'm super pleased with this. Again, obviously I didn't make this one. I'm going to make next year's. I promise you, I'm going to get over there no matter what happens in the world. I'll go on like a canoe across the ocean. I don't care. I'm going to make it happen. But this is definitely, we have a handful of cases of the 2015 left in at Attimo in Denver, but we just bottled our 2016, which we're super pumped. It's going to be released. I think we technically did a soft release this week, but next week it's going to be available to come into the wine shop. But we're super excited. I mean, obviously, like we opened this winery technically in January and closed in March. And then we did the whole like, oh my God, how are we going to make it through this craziness? Just like we've all been through in one way or another. So we have a little kitchen in there. We were doing to-go food. We were doing whatever we can. And even now we put up a big tent. We have a patio with heaters and with the giant spacing. But we are,
Really
as John
quick,
is
Kyle,
like,
if they come down to Attimo, what kind of barrels what do they see? They're going to see all these wines being aged.
yeah. So it's interesting. So you walk in, we have this beautiful tasting room. Now it's more of a wine shop because you can't dine inside, obviously. But as you go through the tasting room, you go into our cellar, and it's an actual cellar. We keep it at 55 degrees year round, humidity, and we have all of our wine aging. So we have over 60 barrels, and we have some tonos, which are the larger barrels that Jessica was mentioning. We have all of our tanks there. So it's an actual like production facility, and it's super interesting to bring in these. So the wine is transported across to Italy from Italy to Denver in a spacecraft is what they're called. It's basically a giant plastic wine bladder, and it has this cardboard box basically. It's just wild. And in order to keep, for us to know that the quality is kept to standards, and we literally have apps on our phones to track the temperature of the boat all the way to the United States. So if it spikes above 55 degrees, our phones light up and we know there's an issue. But we basically take those spacecrafts into the facility and then pump them into these barrels and let the wine stabilize. And it's interesting, like wine, you've heard is a living thing, and it's like so true. But when you taste the wine right off the boat, as you can say, it is stressed out. And when you put it in the barrel for 6 months, it is a completely different thing, So that's why we developed this system of the barrels. Every day, or usually at least once a week, we go through and taste all the barrels to see where they're at and decide when we're going to bottle them. But it's a super interesting project, and we'd love to have you guys down at the tasting room. I know it's like interesting, crazy times. There's the bench. So our label has the bench on the front, and in the town of Monforte, where John moved his family, there's this beautiful like giant bench that overlooks the historic medieval town of Monforte. And that's where he got inspired to call, his winery Attimo, which translates to moment. because this bench is the most epic place to like sit and take a moment. You're like overlooking these vineyards. Can we just give a shout out to Jessica right now for just putting this PowerPoint together on the spot? Yeah, but this bench is like very iconic in Monforte, and you know, John, and one of the many reasons, there's a lot, but one of the main reasons I came to work for John is his appreciation for the moment, and I think this year has been a eye opener for all of us to kind of just take a deep breath and appreciate what really matters to us. And
Kyle, how did he pick Monforte?
So John picked Monforte because he had a buddy who ironically lived in Colorado Springs. His name's Alan Manley. And Alan Manley kind of did the same leap of faith as John did, said, I'm moving to Europe and I'm going to get in the wine business. And John met him through the years in the restaurant biz and reached out to him. He says, hey, I have these friends that are selling a agroturismo, which is a bed and breakfast in Monforte. And John and his wife, Megan, went there on a trip to kind of do some scouting and found this beautiful little agroturismo. They call it La Casa Gialla, which once the world opens up again, Attimo Wine Club members will have access to it. So that's one of the huge things that we want to create for all of you and our Attimo family is to actually go there and experience it. So John has that little bed and breakfast at La Casa Gialla, as I mentioned, that is going to be open. We're going to set up trips. Obviously, John has all the inside scoop of like bars and to go to, and we're going to be kind of like we'll set up a custom trip for you once everything opens up. What I was saying is the reason I work for John is that hospitality is so huge in his life. If you've ever met John Schlegel, he's like Mr. Hospitality. And it's amazing. And it's so fun to have this tasting room and dinner. I can't wait till we can open up because we have this beautiful event space up top that can seat like 150 people that overlooks the production area. We have a beautiful patio, a tasting room, and a fun staff. So I really hope, we all hope that things calm down a little bit and I can see you over at the winery.
Honestly, going to Attimo is an amazing experience. I have traveled to probably 20 different places to taste wine. And there's something really, really annoying about how great wine tastes in the place where it's made because you buy too much of it and then you bring it home. Like you go to Baja, Mexico, you're having a great time. You've had some tequila, taste the wine, it tastes really good. You bring it home and you're like, oh, wow, Baja wine, not very good. Turns out really good on the beach, not so great at home. That's true of a lot of wine regions, and there's something really romantic about the taste of place. I think, you know, I sell Attimo as part of my job. I work for a distribution company, but I was really concerned about how it would translate. How do you walk from Coors Field 2 blocks and walk into a tasting room and sit down and have a glass of Barolo and have the experience of, here, like I'll show you this place, and get a feeling. Like how does that happen? I was really concerned it wouldn't translate, but it actually really does. John and his family lived there long enough. I think that his wife built the entire space, by the way, from scratch. She was on her hands and knees sawing and hammering, and she's pretty awesome. And it really feels like you're there. The wines are authentic. I can speak to that just from years of experience in the wine industry. By the way, Barolo got not Attimo Barolo, but another Barolo won number 7 on Wine Spectator's Top 100 this year. 2 years ago, it was number 1. These are wines to be cherished, totally cherished. It's amazing that we get to have them, both Barolo Barbaresco and Barbera de Alba alike. I don't actually know about the Dolcetto, but these were regions that were so hit by phylloxera in the 1860s through the 1890s that we almost didn't have the Nebbiolo grape again. It almost disappeared completely. Phylloxera is a mite. It's a microscopic little demon mite that chomps and enjoys the roots of vines. And it went on a chomping heyday through the late 1800s, through the entire world, that at least any part of the world that wasn't planted in sand. It can't live in sand. And I would argue that if the British, this is very stupid what I'm about to say, but I'm going to do it because I've had a lot to drink. I would argue that if the British knew that the Americans would save the day with American rootstock to kill phylloxera, they would have fought harder to keep our land, because it's a very weird and silly fact that phylloxera cannot chomp on American rootstock. So grapes that you've had, if you've ever traveled through like Missouri and Michigan, like indigenous American varietal grapes, they don't make great wines. Scuppernong is one of them, if you've ever heard of that, or Concord grapes, or Scuppernong is a varietal grown in Missouri and Virginia. These varietals are from a different vitis. So the grapes you tasted tonight are from Vitis vinifera. It's a very specific, all Chardonnay, Merlot. If you've ever heard of a varietal and you drink it regularly, it's a Vitis vinifera varietal. But from a different genus, a Vitis labrusca or Vitis rotifolia or rotundifolia, sorry. Those varietals have a rootstock that the phylloxera mite does not like. So all of the grapes you're tasting today are grown on American rootstock, but the vine itself is indigenous Italian. Wrap your head around that. That's cuckoo. It's because they've been grafted, or in this case, they're clones of varietals that, you know, they were bred to not have phylloxera problems. But I just try to think always about the history of whatever's in the bottle or in my glass, and think about how lucky I am to have it, because the truth is that Barolo's nearly extinct, which is sad. I've talked for a very long time. Does anyone want me to talk longer or further about any topic? Kyle or I, we're happy to. I'm like,
Were there any questions? I'm happy to answer any questions.
Regarding Attimo, or if you want to hear more about the story, or John, or the future of Attimo. I'm trying to look at these chat questions, but
if not, I want to know the truth. And don't just be a fancy person who thinks that Barolo's the best. I want to know, I'm going to do raising your hand type thing, but who prefers the Barbera to any of the three wines?
well, we got 2, 3.
I might have influenced that decision. Who prefers Dolcetto?
Yeah, we got one. Hey.
And who prefers Barolo?
Oh wait, you want to Barbera? I thought you did Barolo already.
Mm.
Oh my God, I like Barbera.
Yeah, I think
Barbera's my favorite.
I would argue, just from a tasting standpoint, that Barbera is the most approachable of these three wines right now. It's drinking really great. It's got fruit, it's got acid, it's got oak, it's got it all. It's banging, I think, tonight. Barolo, really, really good. If you have some food, it would be really, really hard for me to just like take this wine down all on its own anytime, any day. I think Barolo is a really serious wine. It needs some tomatoes. And Dolcetto to me is like, if I don't want to think about it and I just want to drink a whole bottle by myself and don't want anyone to judge me, and that's the bottle of wine I would pick. Amber loves the Dolcetto. Nicole, you need to let the Barolo breathe longer, for sure.
Figured.
Nicole says she loves the Barolo. She thought she would love the Barolo more, but she only gave it about 20 minutes to breathe.
She knows.
And she's also not eating. Like if you had a steak in front of you, Barolo.
I know I'm
you
gonna
raise the
love
roof
it.
type business.
I had a steak earlier,
Ah.
later, and so it didn't get proper breathing time. That's why I was late.
Yeah, it's super fun to taste it right when you open it, just to see how tight it is, and then taste it 2 to 3 hours later, even through the day.
Ah, I've
It's
not
super
done that
fun to see
before.
that progression.
That's a good idea.
Do you guys catch the acid on all three of these wines? Like they're acidic. Yeah, like they could rip the enamel off your teeth. That's not because they weren't ripe. That's because these varietals are acid-driven varietals. Okay. The other thing is that if you still have a little bit of each wine, I recommend that you taste them a little bit like in tandem or side by side. All three of these wines have a through line for me, which is cherry, for sure, cherry. The Barolo is the most prominent high acid unripe cherry. And then Barbera is like when you get those Washington cherries that are like really, really ready and really, really good and kind of like perfect in between acid and sugar cherries. And then the Dolcetto to me is the darkest fruit, like more black cherry of the three. But again, I've already told you that all of that is subjective and it's in my own head. So maybe I'm full of it.
Does anybody have any other questions, or we just ready to finish those bottles and watch some Netflix, or what's the plan here?
Are there any specific food pairings you would recommend for any one of these? I know y'all had just mentioned steak, Barolo, but any others?
Yeah, I mean, so Northern Italy, or Italy in general, they like, their wine pairs so well with their cuisine. I mean, if you go pasta route, truffle route, red meat route, you're gonna love your life with any of these wines for sure. Jess, do you have any favorite pairings with any particular wine? I mean, Barolo and steak is like heaven. Or Barolo and a fatty red meat is heaven for sure, but
yeah, so there's two ways to pair food. One way is to find a bridge. So two things that are the same. So high acid white wine with goat cheese is really good because goat cheese is really acidic, right? So you're like, oh, goat cheese salad, Sauvignon Blanc, Sancerre, bam, delicious. Tomato sauce, Sangiovese. Sangiovese really smells like when you grow a tomato yourself and the vine smells all spicy, yummy, tomatoey. That to me is what Sangiovese kind of smells like. So that's a bridge. The other way is to find like a variant that would cut through something. So you fry a piece of fish and it's really fatty and buttery and nasty kind of, and then you squeeze a lemon over it. That would be a really good pairing of a really high acid white wine with something really fatty and flabby, because it'll act as sort of like a deterrent. Okay, so the most powerful pairings in the world, I think, are one of those two styles, either a bridge or a negation. And Barolo is famous with steak because it's so high acid that if you put this really salty, fatty, creamy, buttery thing in your mouth and then you wash it down with acid, it's like you've given yourself a bunch of saliva to be hungry again and eat something else. But you've also steak can meet Barolo. Like I really think the reason that this wine, the Barolo, isn't all of your favorite wine right now is because you're not eating. You're just staring at me talk and you're chilling. Like, of course, Barbera is the right choice for chilling and talking and hanging out because you don't need to eat with it. Barolo needs some shit. It needs like fat. It needs salt. So I would say tomato-based sauces that are salty, really weird crumbly Italian cheese that has like crystallization to it, or fatty meats, lamb, anything really gooey and fatty. And the reason that Dolcetto is really good with pizza, by the way, is because Dolcetto is fruity and pizza is salty and fruity. Good. They're a good team. When I cork it and put it in the fridge for a day, is the wine still breathing? What a fine question. No, going with no. Yes, technically, but temperature is a stopper. If you've ever created a sourdough starter or made bread, you know you can turn off the process by just chilling it down. What I was talking about when I was talking about oak was that we didn't have stainless steel tanks. As soon as we had stainless steel tanks, the entire winemaking world changed. So you guys tasted natural wine last week. Were some of the wines funky, Jen? Like bready?
What do you mean? Oh.
Did they have Brettanomyces?
No, the natural wine.
No.
They were all normal.
Yeah, they were all,
Okay.
you know, yeah, they were all super
When-
sweet and, yeah,
When you,
no fun of the fun.
okay, when you age a wine and you don't have temperature control, you are asking bacteria to get into it. Bacteria wants to eat your wine, wants to get in there, wants to have a party. But if you just chill it, bacteria can't live, right? So that's why we use stainless steel a lot to age wine. Oxygen is also not necessarily a friend to wine in its aging process. Sometimes it is, but that's why barrels get topped off and then no touchy for a long time. So if you put a cork in it and you put it in the fridge, you're definitely slowing down the process of oxygenation, which is the #1 killer of wine, and aeration, oxygenation and bacteria growth. If a wine,